He apologised when he was sentenced, not to his victims, but to other right-wing militants for not killing enough people. Is Anders Breivik mad or a product of Europe's growing Islamophobia? Hello and welcome to the new season of The World This Week with me, Phil Rees. We hope you all had a fulfilling and happy Eid. Well, who can forget the events last summer after Anders Breivik bombed Oslo and then went on a shooting rampage, killing 77 people, including dozens of young people on the Norwegian holiday island of Utøya. Anders Breivik's final words in court before he was led away to a lifetime's incarceration were chilling. "I apologise," he said, "to all militant nationalists that I wasn't able to execute more." He then gave his clenched fist salute. Well, the former neo-Nazi said he carried out the attacks to defend Norway against what he called the evils of multiculturalism. The English Defence League said there was a logic to what he did. So, where does the horrors of Norway leave the debate about multiculturalism? That's our main discussion today. Later in the show, a Christian girl is accused of blasphemy in Pakistan, but she's only 14 and some say she's suffering from Down syndrome. Is the blasphemy law being abused in Pakistan? More on that in part 2 in about half an hour. But first to Norway, where a legal panel in Oslo declared Anders Breivik completely sane. Here's Charlotte Hawkins with more.
Last week, Anders Breivik was found in court to be criminally sane and was jailed for 21 years for carrying out attacks in Norway which killed 77 people.
Tiltalte har forklart at hans hensikt var å drepe så mange som mulig i regjeringskvartalet og alle på Utøya. Eksplosjonen og drapene var grundig planlagt, og drapsforsøkene ble gjennomført på grunnlag av en veloverveid beslutning.
On the 22nd of July last year, Breivik detonated a bomb outside government headquarters in Oslo, which killed 8 people. He then travelled to Utøya Island, where he killed 69 adults and children who had been attending a summer camp organised by the Labour Party's youth wing. Breivik's trial lasted 10 weeks, and psychiatrists produced conflicting reports on his sanity. Ultimately, the court found his actions were not due to psychotic delusions, but rather were the result of an extremist subculture which had shaped his right-wing worldview. Breivik says he will not appeal.
Da jeg ikke anerkjenner retten, kan jeg ikke legitimere Oslo tingrett ved å akseptere dommen. Dommen i mine øyne illegitim. Samtidig kan jeg ikke anke dommen fordi jeg ved å anke legitimerer retten.
Breivik claimed he was acting out of necessity to oppose liberal immigration policies, multiculturalism and the spread of Islam. In a 1,500-page manifesto, he claims that Europe is under threat from waves of Muslim newcomers. Smiling at the verdict and giving fascist salutes in court, Breivik considers himself a modern-day crusader, trying to protect Europe from Islamisation. While most condemn his actions, many share his views. Elsewhere across Europe, anti-Islamic rallies have gained support.
We think it's very important that it goes global because what we're fighting is a global ideology. There are no borders, there are no nationalities. We oppose the most radical and extreme ideology on the planet, and that's why the time is right, and the time is now for a counter-jihad, a global counter-jihad movement.
Since Breivik's actions, questions are being asked whether counter-jihadist groups such as these constitute a blind spot in counter-terrorism. As counter-jihad movements become increasingly more global, they may require equal government attention.
Charlotte Hawkins with that report. Well, I'm very pleased to have in the studio Dr. Paul Jackson, the director of the Radicalism and New Media Research Group at the University of Northampton. We also have Dr. Taj Hargey, the chairman of the Muslim Educational Centre of Oxford and a trustee of British Muslims for Secular Democracy. On the phone we have from Norway, Shoaib Sultan from the Norwegian Centre Against Racism. And finally, Professor Anthony Glees, the director of the University of Buckingham's Centre for Security and Intelligence Studies. So, packed house here, but let's first talk to Norway. Shoaib Sultan, how was the trial verdict greeted in Norway?
By most people, it was greeted with a sign of relief because there had been this huge discussion about him being declared insane and does not be able to be sentenced, and I think that was most people were quite happy that the court said that it's the ideology which is behind this, and that it was greeted with some relief.
But how has it affected the sort of debate in Norway amongst, shall we say, the chattering classes about Islamophobia, about multiculturalism? How has it affected that?
We haven't seen any real effects of that yet, because that's yet to come. But what is important there is that amongst some of the groupings we see as Islamophobic, the whole debate was tried to shift towards his persona. That saying that this individual was insane, and that whatever ideology he said he belonged to, you can't sort of use that against other people holding that kind of views. And of course, nobody is saying that anybody else but himself was guilty here. But the problem was that the ideology wasn't being put. The focus wasn't being put on the ideology. And the hope is that with this verdict, in the coming weeks and months, we'll have a deconstruction of this whole ideology of faith.
But has it brought Muslims and non-Muslims together in Norway, or indeed alienated them?
The terror act and what happened over a year ago ended up bringing people more close together. But the question is if that is something that's going to last. We just don't know yet.
Okay.
Some of the effects are gone. Young Muslims in Norway expressed that, especially for a while after the terror attack, that they noticed a quite significant change in how other people perceive them, and that certainly sort of has faded away now. We're more or less back to the debate, and the general climate of the debate is about where it was 21st July 2011.
So there's still a debate about multiculturalism, about the so-called threat of Islam in Norway.
Absolutely. Especially in some circles, but in the wider society, I think this whole theory, this whole conspiracy theory, sort of has it's much more difficult for them to sell the idea now. But for the hardliners, for people believing in this, I don't think anything has changed at all.
Okay.
People just try to look away from the 22nd of July and say that what was true before is true now, and if it's one crazy person shouldn't be allowed to make us alter our views.
Okay, Shoaib, Sultan, thank you so much for joining us from Norway. Dr. Paul Jackson, one of the things, obviously, that seemed to be a centerpiece of this is whether he was sane or not, whether Anders Breivik was sane and rational. Do you agree that he was?
I think in the sort of the legal debates around all of this, there's a very sort of simplistic argument of yes or no, mad or sane. And in terms of sort of the law courts, then that has to be black or white. I'm a historian, and one of the things that this whole debate reminds me of is debates on the Holocaust and perpetrators during genocides more generally, where there is a curious discussion and debate around aspects of an ideology that appear irrational and crazy and mad and make people do very peculiar and very extreme things, and also a very great extent of rationality to the carrying out of those sorts of activities.
Because if you say it's rational, you're kind of accepting that there is some basis to it.
Well, as I say, I think that there's a curious combination between a fantasy world that Breivik has created and a great amount of rationality, sort of setting out how all of that should be carried out. And his terrorist operation was quite slick certainly by far-right standards, and that has to be very much noted. But as I say, there's a sort of, I think, a sense that there's something psychologically awry with Breivik. And there is a discourse amongst academics, a growing discourse on lone wolf or solo actor terrorists that I've contributed to. And what that tends to point out is that they're, unlike group actor terrorists, these kind of solo actor terrorists have some sort of psychological vulnerability, be that powerful depression or some other psychological vulnerability that feeds into their personalization of a wider ideology. So there are mental health issues with these sorts of figures, certainly. Whether that makes them excuses their actions, I think, is a very different debate, though.
But I mean, Dr. Taj Hargey, isn't the point is that if you looked at his manifesto 2083 entitled, in fact, many of the ideas there are actually part of everyday discussion now in the political world that we live in about immigration, about the so-called threat of outsiders. I mean, isn't that a problem?
Yes, I think it's a big problem. I think Breivik represents, I think, the ideology of the Europe's underclass, who feel threatened by newcomers and people of different cultures and religions and so forth. But I think his angst or his anger or his anxiety is obviously taken an extreme view. But I think also it is incumbent on any immigrant to any place to adjust and to adapt. And I think the trouble with a lot of immigrants, especially Muslims, is when they come from abroad, they do not actually adapt and adjust to the society. I've maintained in public that most Muslims since the Second World War has come to the United Kingdom, came here for four main reasons. They came here either for work, or to have family reunions, or to study, or as refugees or asylum seekers. Now, no one brought them in chains here. There may be historical reasons why they've come here, but certainly it was an act of individual preference that brought them here. Now, if that has brought them here... So you think
that that's part of the reason why Breivik did what he did, that Muslims aren't prepared to assimilate properly?
I wouldn't use the word assimilate. I think we need to talk about integration. I'm very proud and pleased to be a Muslim. I have a British Muslim identity. I'm perfectly integrated and I've adapted and adjusted to this society. For example, if someone tells me come at 4:30, I'm there at 4:30. I don't rock up at 6:30, you know, which other cultures, and say Muslim cultures, would tend to do. Punctuality is less important. But I think what's important here is that if anyone who comes to another place. If I, for example, decide that my future is in Shanghai, the first thing I would need to do is to learn Cantonese and learn to use a chopstick and to integrate in that society if I wanted to be successful.
But I mean, listen, beyond timekeeping here, Dr. Hargey, are you actually saying that you can put a blame on Muslims in Britain for almost creating
no, I think what we have to say is that there is a certain amount of culpability here. This thing doesn't come from a vacuum. I mean, what multiculturalism has done is to create parallel universes and almost a cultural ghetto and sort of apartheid-like situation. And when the communities are not talking to each other, they are not integrating, they don't know each other. So no, I'm not blaming Muslims, but I think neither can Muslims say, listen, we are just victims here. This it's too simple to say, listen, this is all to do with the victim mentality. And I think we Muslims must get out of that thing and realize, listen, yes, we are not culpable for Breivik and for any other nutcase out there with the EDL or the BNP and so forth. But we need to also see it, look at ourselves.
Well, you don't think this dialogue is actually dangerous in triggering people like Breivik to feel they have a certain legitimacy?
No, I think we expose them and not to pretend they don't exist. I think Breivik and others, the right-wingers in this society, let's talk about the UK, the EDL and the BNP, we should be taking them on in the public forum, not to say, listen, we will not give you space, we will not give you a forum. We should be actually exposing them. And unfortunately, many Muslims and some liberal Guardian-type readers say, no, we can't talk with the EDL or we can't talk to the BNP. We should be engaged in to expose the fruitcake ideas.
Okay, Dr. Anthony Glees, you're on the phone there. I mean, you've been listening to that. Now, obviously, Breivik quoted a large number of writers, material produced by American anti-Muslim writers, Robert Spencer, Gregory Davis. We heard Pamela Geller there in the report earlier. I mean, do you think these people are to blame? I mean, do you think that actually they're culpable for developing ideas that actually fed Breivik?
Well, I think somebody like Breivik gets his ideas from all sorts of places.
Well, it was mostly these people.
These people are like magpies. They pick up things that have been said that seem to support their worldview. But the basic issue with this man is that despite what Norwegian judges ruled, and I think we have to recognise that Norway has been deeply traumatised by this affair, understandably so, much as the United States was traumatised after 9/11. Breivik has traumatised Norway. The judges said he was sane. I think they were entirely wrong. This man is as mad as a hatter. And
you think his ideas are mad, believing there's a threat from Islamic civilization?
Well, the idea was not that he believed there was a threat from Islam. It was that he believed that killing lots of Norwegians was in some way a means of addressing the threat or drawing attention to the threat that he saw from Islam against the evidence. I mean, one's got to make this point again and again, and I'm glad that your other guest has underlined the importance of integration. The vast majority of Muslims in the world want nothing to do with terrorism. The vast majority of Muslims in the world want to be loyal citizens of the country which they live in. And in the United Kingdom, there is...
Well, what's that got to do with it, Dr. Glees? We're talking about the terrorist was a white supremacist.
The terrorist was a white supremacist who built a case that Muslim immigration equaled a Muslim or Islamic or Islamist takeover of the West. And that was mad. The fact that mad people can be terrorists does not strike anybody who's studied European history in the 20th century as absurd.
But do you think that there is a current of opinion shared by our Prime Minister, David Cameron, when he spoke in Munich last year, that actually there is a challenge to Western civilization that somehow shares a lot of what Breivik was saying? Certainly Breivik took it to an extreme, of course, with full respect to the Prime Minister.
No,
but I mean, that germ of an idea is there.
No, I don't think David Cameron was saying that at all. What David Cameron was saying was that integration is extremely important and diversity is fine, but there has to be integration. What he was saying was multiculturalism is wrong, both because it leads certain communities, let's say Muslim communities, but it can be other communities, to feel separate from the mainstream, and because there are mad people out there that use this separateness.
So it's a dangerous idea, though, to be going on about multiculturalism and rejecting it. You know, you've got to be aware, I mean, Professor, that perhaps there are people out there who would interpret those ideas and go mad.
Well, you've got to, what needs to happen with mad people is that they need to be prevented from acting out their wicked fantasies and killing people.
Well,
and one of the consequences of the Breivik case has been, as you know, the resignation of the police chief of Oslo. It's very clear that this man could have been stopped. And the problem with Norway is...
OK, but ideas can be very dangerous, Professor Gleeson. Bear with it. We're going to come back to you now, but I've got to bring in Dr. Paul Jackson here. I mean, what would you say about that? I mean, is there a problem that it's no longer taboo to talk about Islamophobia and that actually that can fuel the ideas of people like Anders Breivik?
Well, I think we need to be a little bit careful when talking about these ideas. We don't lump everybody into the same pot. You know, sort of say a casual comment from Jeremy Clarkson is not the same thing as the extended commentaries of Peter Jensen or Fjordman, to use his pseudonym.
One of the bloggers who of course, Breivik
which I'm just
followed.
about to do an analysis of, and just today I cut and pasted all the Peter Jensen entries from Breivik's manifesto onto a Word document, and it came to 200 pages. There is a sustained narrative running through these more extreme bloggers that Breivik in his manifesto has dubbed the Vienna School, which isn't to be confused with various other Vienna schools that have existed through the 20th century. But centred around the website The Gates of Vienna, which Peter Jensen contributes to, or has contributed to quite regularly. I think with these sorts of figures who contribute, broadly speaking, to this anti-jihadi global movement that you had some commentary on your package as well, there is what is clearly a licence to hate developing towards Muslim communities. And again, this isn't anything to do with multiculturalism and integration per se. This is being created by people who aren't all that connected, aren't all that concerned with the realities of the situations they're describing. They want to create this fantasy. And I think what it does is it allows people to imagine violence and imagine a Europe without Muslim communities in it, a sort of a purified Europe, as it were. That's one step.
Is this license to hate not becoming common currency, though, in a way that, for example, racism now is no longer part of dialogue within polite society, within the political milieu, yet Islamophobia has become it. And, how can you separate some of the views that said that multiculturalism is wrong and we must, increase protection, immigration, stop Muslims coming in, stop mosques being built, and stop somebody behaving like Breivik and taking that license to hate one step further?
Well, the one step further is the license to kill, and this is a language derived from analysis of Holocaust and genocides. And certainly Breivik is somebody who took that license to hate to its ultimate conclusion, which is not just to imagine a Europe free from Muslims, but try to carry out violent activity to make that happen. And you're right, there is a sliding scale between casual commentary in the mass media to more extreme commentary on websites such as, say, the EDL, to more nuanced ideological positions set out on pages such as The Gates of Vienna, to figures like Breivik. And we also live in a liberal society, so we can't ban all of this discourse either. But to go back to an earlier point, I think that we do need to challenge it in the public sphere, and I think that's...
Well, Dr. Hargey, are you worried that some of your comments might be misinterpreted by someone like Breivik? The EDL in Britain might jump on the back and say, hey, we like what you're saying about the need for assimilation and integration.
Well, I mean, they may misinterpret it, but I think the fundamental thrust is that when immigrants come here, I'm an immigrant, and we need to accept a reality that, listen, we've given up the old country for whatever reason, and we're now in a new land, and we need to become integrated, not assimilated. I don't go for the assimilated stuff. I think integration is a very important thing because it means that I retain my religious identity, but I don't bring all the cultural baggage with me. And on the issue of multiculturalism, I would want to go a step further. We should jettison that and replace that with interculturalism, because multiculturalism leads to parallel universes, little ghettos, little apartheid, little structures, no one speaking to each other. Interculturalism means that there's a give and take, and unfortunately there's not enough give and take in our society of multiculturalism.
Final word, we're running out of time. Just final word, Professor Glees. Are you going to, as it were, curb your language next time when we talk about multiculturalism for fear of the likes of Anders Breivik maybe listening to you?
No, I think that's nonsense. Somebody like Hitler quoted Charles Darwin repeatedly. That doesn't make Darwin a precursor of racism. And I think your talk about Islamophobia is also entirely misguided. It's a term abused to imply that we need a Britain or a Europe that is multicultural rather than a Europe which is based on equality, respect for people, whatever their ethnic background, and it's values like that, when they're expressed...
Okay. Professor Glees, I'm not censoring you. We're running out of time, though, okay? So I'm afraid... Thank you very, very much for joining us, Professor Glees, Dr. Hargey, Paul Jackson, and all our guests. Well, we're coming to a short break. Thank you. In part 2, Pakistan's blasphemy law under scrutiny. A young girl is accused of burning a holy text, but Christians are worried there, and they're saying it's used to settle scores and attack minorities. More on that in a few minutes. Stay with us.